Hello, and welcome to the Distillery. I'm your host, Harry Lee Shanglun. I'm streaming from the lands of the people of the Kulin Nations. Today we have special guest Emily Kim. Hey, Emily, how are you doing?
Hi, Harry. I'm really good to be here. How are you?
I am well, thank you. It is 10 a.m. here in Narm, also known as Melbourne, Australia. What time is it over where you are?
It is 8 p.m. In military time. That is 20 p.m. or 20 colon dot 00. Again, Americans, we don't do military time. So I'm just converting for you all who are in Australia.
I think Australians don't really use it either, but
They
Europe is a
don't?
big fan. No, it's mostly Europe,
Oh,
and I've heard Japan has an amazing time system where if it becomes 3 a.m., it's actually 27 o'clock.
oh wow. Whoa.
Uh, yeah. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Emily, I'm so excited to chat with you. You're living in Maryland and you're studying creative writing, but we actually met here in Melbourne. And yeah, can you tell us more about what you were doing here in Melbourne, Australia?
So I arrived in Melbourne in February of 2018, and I was there until December of that year. So I was in Melbourne interning for Power to Change, which is a ministry for uni students. They exist at different campuses, different unis across Australia. So my team was at RMIT, and we basically were working with a student community that had been formed the year prior, but with city unis, it is quite difficult to do ministry, and it's also very different from American uni ministry. So we were working with a small group and trying to build up community, trying to add numbers, foster relationships, and mentor students so that they could be equipped to be leaders and create a sustainable model of uni ministry so that after me and the other team members left, the ministry would be in good hands with the RMIT students who would be able to lead their ministry. So I was there for about a year, and then I returned to the States around Christmas of 2018.
And just to clarify, when you say ministry, this is Christian ministry. Could you
Yeah.
summarize, for those that aren't familiar, what is the aim of Christian ministry? What does it seek to do?
So it makes me think about Matthew 28, which has been this like standard verse that we learn in the church. And it's a model of where Jesus says, go out and make disciples of all nations. So basically wanting and talking to people who come from different faiths, different backgrounds, getting to know their stories and sharing with them about Christianity. And I know that today with Christianity not really having the best reputation due to politics, I think that kind of work is still important to do just so that people could meet Christians who, I don't know, are actually nice and reflect Jesus and reflect the teachings of the Bible about love and community. So we start with that, and then once people are more interested in learning about their faith, they could be in that community to talk about it with others.
I think this thing that you've alluded to, that Christians are not one monolithic entity, and that
Right.
many people who call themselves Christians, they have a different politic or perspective on life, and so this is this huge gamut or range of experiences that people will have with Christians. And you returned to the States. You mentioned around Christmas time, but broadly speaking, at a very tumultuous era,
Yeah.
one where, yeah, Christians are kind of at the center of a deep divide. Um, can you tell us more about your experience on the ground level through things like Black Lives Matter as they happen and unfold at this present time?
Yeah. So as we all know, 2016 was a very eventful year with the election and with Trump being president. And I remember feeling just really, really confused and very much dejected because I had this feeling that our country felt like it was going to go downhill year by year. And now here we are in 2020, which is another election year. And I just feel like so many things were in like this pressure boiler, and it really blew up with the murder of George Floyd. And then Black Lives Matter just really resurged into this huge movement. And I had never seen it this almost popular before. And the thing is, Black Lives Matter was formed in the wake of Trayvon Martin's death, and also resurged with Michael Brown's death in Ferguson. And so now it feels like more people are on board with Black Lives Matter, because not only was George Floyd murdered, but Breonna Taylor was murdered in her home on a no-knock warrant. And then earlier in May, there was the murder and execution of Ahmaud Arbery that was on tape. And with a lot of these Black deaths, a lot of them are recorded on tape. And so there's also this sense of everybody's watching. Everybody can see what happened. Everybody gets to, honestly, it's a weird kind of consumption of pain, of trauma, consumption of racism at hand. So now that, especially in quarantine, since more people are home and don't have as much time with work and such, I think everybody's eyes were on George Floyd. It was this kind of unavoidable topic. It was everywhere on the news. People were talking about it. And then with Black Lives Matter, and that being a part of it, that was also an unavoidable topic. And it was really interesting to watch the various responses to Black Lives Matter. But it was also sort of encouraging to see more people actually like proclaim it, I guess, through social media. That was the only way you could tell. But at the same time, personally, I was like, okay, we've been saying Black Lives Matter for years. And now in 2020, it feels almost too late. Like, what if we did go on board with Black Lives Matter years before? And I don't know, if policy changes happened, if people's perspectives happened, then maybe this Black death could have been prevented, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's just been really, really interesting. But a lot of emotions with frustration and pain and anger, confusion. So it's been quite a time over here.
And I'm particularly interested in the response from, I guess, local ministry communities and Christian like churches and different communities that follow Christ. What has been your experience in terms of how the Christian community has responded to what's happening?
Oh, it's been really interesting. I feel like interesting is the word of the night. I think it's been, for churches, it's been difficult because at least like the church that I have been going to for years and years and years, they never really addressed anything outright related to racism. They never really addressed Philando Castile, which I thought was the breaking point because his murder was on Facebook Live. I thought they were going to say something with Ferguson and Michael Brown. Not really. And so I think because a lot of churches and a lot of Christians, they see what's happening in the world. They see these things are related to politics and race. There's this weird separation that they want to establish of that, you know, this is the world, this is worldly, but we are set apart. So we're not going to engage with that. But what's a concern there with that thinking is that if Black people are made in the image of God and they're being killed and dehumanized merely for the color of their skin, then that pains God. And we are doing a disservice to our brothers and sisters, to God's creation. So I've been seeing this, it varies. Like for some, I think there's been hesitancy and then silence because they don't know what to say and they've never been able to talk about this. And then there's other churches who they made a statement like within the first week. They were creating these events, these webinars, these panels. But for churches and especially Christian leaders who haven't been experienced, but they want to jump on it just so that they can make a response, I've seen this unwise result where they need to take a step back, actually, and maybe learn from Black and brown activists, from Black and brown Christians who have been doing this work, to really ask God and to be patient in maybe how they do things. I think for Christians and especially white churches, they are so used to leading and being the first ones to do something, or being the ones that other churches and other Christians look to. So it is a very humbling experience, but they're not used to sitting back and learning from Black churches, churches where there's a majority of people of color. So I've been seeing these two kind of opposite reactions, these two opposite responses. And I don't know, like, I don't think a church could really do it perfectly, and no church is perfect. But what should happen, and I think what really encourages, especially Christians of color, is to see that your church does say something so that you can feel seen, safe, and heard. You know that the church you've been attending has your back, and that they have action steps. They say, these are the following things we want to do in response to into Black Lives Matter. And to also, this is very important, to have accountability so that they're able to follow through on those things that they're promising. And also accountability in how they're going about those things. And in that, to really give the mic to Black and brown Christians who are experienced.
It feels like churches have like a unique affordance in many ways. You know, this is already a structure of leadership and community, to have these conversations and to really be able to change people's stance. And the conversations around like practical ethics should be one that is continuously had. So it feels like it should be a place where a lot of these things can be progressed. And yet, I've read that churches, particularly in America, are basically like the last bastion of racial segregation, that they're one of the most racially segregated places. Have you observed, I guess, you know, we're both minorities in our respective countries in the way that we're Asian American, Asian Australian. How has that affected or changed the conversation when thinking about the global enterprise of anti-Blackness?
I've really been observing and sort of analyzing, kind of playing armchair anthropologist with looking at at least for me, the Asian American community in response to Black Lives Matter, and seeing a whole lot of anti-Blackness, which honestly is not new. I think what's been hard is that I can see from the point of view of Asian Americans who don't really get Black Lives Matter or who are hostile to it, what I've been seeing is that they have been part of the model minority myth, which was established when like Asian immigration was legal in America. And so that myth told them that they had to be hardworking, to be quiet, submissive, and just go about their lives being successful and rising to the top and being more successful than Black and brown immigrants. And they really fell into that. But a result of that was that I don't think they really had this chance or feeling this permission to speak out about injustice that was affecting their community. And if that has been happening for decades, and then George Floyd and Black Lives Matter comes to a head, what I've seen is that they're like, well, what about me? I don't feel like I'm a part of this conversation, because in race, a lot of the times, at least in America, it's a Black and white binary. So where does Asian American fit into that? And then amongst the Asian American community, there is so much variety. You have like Southeast Asians, South Asians, and East Asians. So then how can our experiences be conglomerated into this one neat package when we're talking about race and Black Lives Matter? I also do know that, at least with my family, and I know with a lot of other first generation, second generation families, our experience with immigration really had to do with anti-Blackness, or at least anti-Blackness was a part of that. With my grandparents owning a convenience store in inner city Baltimore. And so their neighbors and their customers were predominantly Black. And because they had negative interactions with their Black customers, they created this very easy association that, oh, if I have these negative experiences, that means this whole group of people is bad. I think they've grown in that, but that's not very unique to the Asian American community. And then also just knowing abroad, like in South Korea, anti-Blackness is very clear, especially with colorism. And
right, there's like lightening creams and things, right?
Bleach your skin, you want bigger eyes, you want like a smaller face. Just this aspiration to whiteness. I can see it in South Korea. And there's an aspiration of whiteness here because with the model minority myth, if you're successful and rich and educated, it's like you're almost white, but whiteness or this proximity is conditional for us because even as much as we get there, we're never going to be fully accepted and be on the same level.
That's a good reminder that like we can't be playing these games and just trying to win on the terms of the oppressor or the colonizing mindset, because it's not going to ultimately bring about any justice or any good for all of us. Right.
We would be complicit in anti-Blackness, and instead of looking at white supremacy as the thing that has been dehumanizing us, it's like we have the wrong aim and the wrong goal and shifting the blame.
So I want to ask you about, I guess, intersection of your faith and justice and writing, which is the thing that you do and are studying at the moment. But just before that, I guess I wanted to kind of sum up that last conversation point by asking, what do you want to see more of in terms of how Christians approach difficult topics, whether that be things like gender, feminism, critical theory, things that I think have been very challenging to churches?
Yeah. I think once we realize as Christians, and even looking at the Bible, it's a biblical truth that there is so much variety in humanity, in the kinds of humans that there are. And also, I can't be just put into a box of like gender and race, sexuality, whatever, though it is important to know that those things really affect our mobility in life. So I think Christians can tend to be in this sort of holy bubble. And once they like hear these things in the news or see these things, they will put up these walls and defenses of like, again, what I mentioned earlier, the world, and then there's me. I would really encourage Christians who, if they genuinely want to know more, just devote yourself to learning about that one thing. And make sure that you're looking at different perspectives and not just like the perspective that confirms what you already believe, which I've kind of been seeing with race. White Christians who want to learn, then they're looking to like Black Christians or people of color who have the same views as them and is actually against fighting injustice. So really put yourself out there into what's there on the internet, because Google is free. You could go on YouTube, read a book, Google like books about feminism in the Bible. So just vary which voices you're learning from, and really challenge yourself with who you're learning from.
Yeah, I think that's a really great provocation or call to action. One that I'm particularly excited about because I think you're exactly right in the way that Christians think about eternity and then life is just this kind of passing journey is central to the way that we construct our faith and a worldview. But we have to recognize that like while we're here, it's not as if though we're magically inured to cultural problems. And like we have to be really careful about interrogating our faith to see what is actually a worldly cultural problem versus what we're called to do biblically or right. By our faith. So I love that solution of just like opening up to other voices and hearing other perspectives so that we can get a better picture of what's happening here on earth.
Yeah. And also just having discernment too of like what you said, oh, is this person like, are they biased in this one way, or is this view like not compatible with mine? But still just being honest with yourself instead of trying to pick a side automatically, which is what we tend to do.
So picking up on your instruction to read a book, which is always a good imperative, you are a writer, somebody who deals in words and smiths them together. What's the impact of your faith and your thoughts about justice on your writing?
So I think my writing and the ideas, the stuff I wanted to put out there became a lot more rich and impactful once my faith actually started to decolonize. And once I realized that my faith intersects with justice, because interacting with people, hearing their stories, and digging beneath than what's the surface is actually going to make me more compassionate to them, even if we're different or even if we disagree. And that's what writing is. That's what fiction and narratives are. You can read the book, you start the page, and then maybe within the first chapter, you hate this one character. But what the author's job is, if you're doing it right, this person isn't just a villain. It's not the person you're rooting against, but we're going to show you this person's story and why they are the way they are. And those have been the most impactful stories for me. I think they've really shaped just a growing muscle in empathy, in compassion, taking a second before making a judgment, giving someone the benefit of the doubt. And so with my writing, I really aim to just delve into characters that might be unassuming on the surface, but who have their own backstory. They have their triggers and traumas that have made them the way they are. And often it really delves into identity with gender and race. I don't necessarily have like this goal in mind when I start a story. I'm not like, oh, this story is going to be about an Asian American woman who blah, 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 blah. But it just writes itself. But I always want to go like a step further than what you might see when you're interacting in person with someone, just going beyond and deeper.
It sounds very character driven and maybe philosophically similar to your work with ministry, right? You're kind of diving into the interiority of someone and listening and letting them reveal something. Sorry, there was no question there. I was just like excited to hear your thoughts on like.
That's okay. And it paused a little bit.
Yeah. I paused to let you speak. Is there a connection, explicit or implicit, with how you evangelize or do ministry work and how you write?
That's such a good question. I think when I first did Crew, which is the American version of Power to Change, and it was pretty big on evangelism, I was really scared because I had these preconceived notions of evangelism and they were negative associations. But I mean, there are certain criticisms I do have about the Crew/Power to Change model of evangelism, and perhaps it's changed. But one thing that I appreciated about it was it's not like, oh, you have to believe. It more should have been, in a good conversation would be just that, a conversation where you're asking questions, you're asking follow-up questions. It's kind of like being a journalist, to be honest. You're just gathering information and learning a person's story, and then just trusting God with the person that you talk to. But those conversations, I know for me, have been really memorable, and they've taught me to really be a good listener so that I could ask those follow-up questions, and really know how to, I guess, kind of translate things for people, know my audience, know who I'm talking to, what background they're from. So when it comes to writing, I have to really know my character, and I really have to dive deep into their world, into the people who they're around. It's just a whole unique environment for each character and each story that I have to really dig intimately into. And if I'm having writer's block, I know it's because I don't really know the character and I haven't spent that time into their world. And so once I start like writing and brainstorming lists about these characters and the world they're in, then it just becomes richer and it actually makes it easier for me to write.
And who do you write for? Who's your intended audience?
I would say that I write for Asian Americans predominantly, at least like Korean Americans, East Asians, because a lot of my experience is in those stories, my observations. I also want to write for Christians and non-Christians. For Christians, I think of how there isn't really a lot of literature out there for that faith community in terms of like literature that has faith topics but isn't explicitly Christian. Like sort of like C.S. Lewis's works, but less religious and less intense.
Less allegorical.
Yeah, less allegorical. I'm not doing the whole like Aslan thing. And really wanting to show them that like you can have stories about doubting your faith. You could have stories about decolonizing your faith and making your faith authentic. And then I also think about non-Christians because I also want to show them that being a Christian does not mean that everything is perfect. It involves messing up. It involves doubting and maybe thinking this isn't for me, but maybe that involves, for a character, it could involve building up their faith or walking away from it. So those would be my 3 intended audiences for my writing.
So we've got Asian Americans, because you're drawing from your experiences,
Yeah.
And Christians and non-Christians, kind of exposing each audience to the other perspective and drawing those things together. That sounds amazing. If people want to follow your work or find you on socials, where can they go? So
I have my Twitter and my Instagram. Those are the only things I have. My Twitter is YLimeKim, so it's actually Emily backwards, YLIME Kim, one word. And then my Instagram is E_KIMMY. And with my Instagram, I hope to promote more of my newsletter, which I'm hoping to work on more, a newsletter just about my musings of faith and art and what's happening in the world.
I think it's really exciting to hear more perspectives of Christians who are thinking about creative output. Something I've long held is that we're made in the image of God and God is the creator, and that gives us like that capacity to be creative. So when we create and go through that process, it's like, oh, that is a way that we can glorify God and
exactly.
Kind of mirror that process. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming on to the Distillery.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me. I really enjoyed this.
Awesome. It's a great pleasure.
Bye.
Take care. That was Emily Kim, and I'm Harry Li Shanglun, host of The Distillery, a casual online interview series. You can find us online at our website, distillery.site, and also follow our socials, Instagram at distillery.site and Twitter at distillery_site, to find out more about previous episodes, future episodes, and all sorts of cool whiz-bang secrets. Everyone take care and stay safe. I'll see you again soon.